In modern Japan, anyone can live the life they choose while harmoniously contributing to society. The pandemic has provided an opportunity for women to show how emotional sensitivity is good for the benefit of our coworkers. I believe that society has learned the importance of these skills, and they will be greatly sought out in the future. Men and women think differently, have their own challenges and their own strengths. It's important to respect these differences for putting positive change into practice.
Welcome, everybody. We are continuing in our journey of trying to fix the world here. And this is a panel on how we are going to enhance women's leadership in investment funds, particularly venture capital. The 11:30 panel did a very good job of that already, but we are going to go in depth. And I wanted to just share a few statistics before I introduce this extraordinary panel. We have, so the statistics here are extraordinary. We have, in 2020 was the worst year for women in venture capital. 2%. 2% of the funds went to women founders and women startups. This is a tragedy. We need to do something about it, and we're here to talk about how we're going to change it, because these women are change agents. The other issue here is that we know that women VC investors also hire other women, so that's very important. So it is an augmenter, so we need to get more women in venture capital, and we need to get more women who are investing in other women. Another interesting statistic was that only 12% of women write that check for venture capital. So, if you have your checkbooks ready, these women know what to do with your money in case you're feeling generous and want to do something. But the good news here, and there is good news, is that women will control 2/3 of the wealth in the United States by 2030. By 2030, we're almost there. And in terms of global wealth, female-controlled wealth is expected to hit $72 trillion by 2030. Okay, so think about those statistics, and that's why this panel is so important, because actually these women are going to help change the world in terms of getting the capital to the right people. And we'll start with Sophie Swire, who is the CEO of a fantastic company, VC company called Gender Equity Diversity Investments. That stands for JEDI. I hope you all know what that all stands for too, okay? We are here to change the world, and the force will be with them and us. We then have Gold Dar Hood, who is the CEO of Ads for Earth, and she's right here. And also another amazing entrepreneur, serial entrepreneur, I would say, and she will tell you what she's doing personally to change the world. Rania Nasser is senior advisor and head of compliance of the Saudi Public Investment Fund, which is the largest sovereign wealth fund in the world. This is not chump change, folks, okay? I think, what was it, $430 billion?
Yes.
Okay, $430 billion. So Rania here could actually solve a lot of issues. And I'm sure she knows a lot of the women who can solve a lot of issues in Saudi Arabia. And last but absolutely not least, Kalia, Princess Kalia, who is a venture partner in JEDI and an expert in mental health, and has some very, very important words to say about what this pandemic actually has, how it's affected women particularly, which I don't think we've talked enough about. So without further ado, Sophia.
Thank you all very much for coming here today, and a particular thank you to Chiara
who has done an outstanding job of bringing the attention of the world to female founders and women in politics and business, and I just wanted to say a huge thank you. It's a great honor to be here today at your invitation. Thank you. So my name is Sophia Swire, and I've been a serial social entrepreneur from the age of about 25 when I gave up a life in banking to go off to the Hindu Kush to set up multiple schools to tackle the problem of access to education for young women, young Muslim women. And I had a fashion business for a while and gave 10% of the proceeds to fund this philanthropic activity, and then spent a decade in Afghanistan trying to unlock the economic potential of the gemstone and mineral resources for women as well. And I got back from the Himalayas and the Hindu Kush, and I thought, what can I do for the rest of my working life that can have maximum impact? And this was around the time of the Me Too campaign, which started to focus the world's attention on lack of access to finance and networks for fabulous, badass female founders. And so I was absolutely horrified to discover that at that time, I think it was 3% of global private equity and venture capital funding that was going to female teams. You rightly said that that's fallen back now to just over 2%, which is just unconscionable, really. The good news is that in spite of those statistics, there's more female founders getting funded now on the planet than there has ever been. The issue is that the gap between female-founded companies and companies founded by mixed genders or male founders has widened because of the sheer volume of venture capital that's being deployed at the moment. And I believe that the statistic in Europe is the gap between male and female founders is something like 3 billion euros at the moment, which is huge. Yeah. So I decided that it was time to do something about it, and hence JEDI. That was the foundation behind JEDI.
Okay. So Gold.
Yes.
Tell me what are the issues and how are we going to fix this? Because 2 or 3%. I mean, we've made huge strides on women in boards. You heard all of today. 20 years ago, it seemed like sort of a faraway target, and we're getting there. Okay, we needed regulation, or maybe we need some regulation here too. But the situation is dire.
Absolutely. So, I think the first thing that bears mentioning on that is that the issue is complicated. And the problem is we can't be scared of complicated. So one of the investors that I spoke with at one point earlier this year, he said, that was very interesting. You're clearly very knowledgeable about the subject. The problem is important. But if you can't articulate that within 20 seconds, then this is not fundable. And I said, with all due respect, that's survivor bias. You are only interested in funding small ideas that can be articulated in 20 seconds. And that is not how we create a regenerative economy.
Bravo.
So, it's very true. And I think that's one of the amazing and important reasons why women have to be in the room evaluating these concepts, because we have to be willing to engage with the complexity of these issues in order to do that. And admittedly, I come from a little bit of an advantage on this score. I am grounded in my career as a technologist, and I started off being curious about the very fundamental things and how things are built, mechanical engineering. And then from that, I went into artificial intelligence, and I used that to look at enterprise software, to look at global resource allocation, and moved from there into finance about this question of how do we take real physical change that needs to happen in businesses and really motivate that change at a macroeconomic level. And then that has drawn me back to the venture that I spun off this past year, which is called Ads for Earth. And the goal there is dual. One is to create data that can fuel our decision-making process in the VC and in the investment banking spaces to say who are making full, meaningful changes. And the second is to empower individuals to do that, because the key here is to claim ownership over that power that we have.
So empowering the individuals, does that mean empowering the men as well as the women? Can you?
It does.
Yes.
As a matter of fact, I think Sophia would be the first person to point out that it's actually mixed teams that perform the best. The data that we're seeing says that when a VC expands and takes on a mixed gender decision-making team, that even by just a 10% improvement threshold, that's really achievable, right? They actually directly corresponds to a 10% increase in success successful exits. That is huge. What people generally complain about in VC is that there's such a small percentage of success. Turns out that's pretty easy to fix when you have the people in the room who understand some of the core problems.
So speaking about people in the room understanding core problems, you are in the room trying to understand some core problems and actually really trying to, I mean, in a country that is not known for women, publicly facing women involved in investment, you are very much in the very high levels and giving advice on the sovereign wealth fund. So if you can talk about, first of all, how many women are there in this incredible public sovereign wealth fund, and is their advice different? Do they come from a different perspective?
Yes, this is really a great question, and thanks, Chiara, for the invitation and for putting all these, great minds together in a single room. I'm coming from Saudi Arabia, where maybe not all of you know the barriers that we had to break throughout the years. And this has been understood by the leadership, where 6 years ago it has been announced that we have to have a vision for the country for the social and economic reform. And we had to go through fixing the system, because it was all about fixing the system, not fixing the women or fixing the people. We're all well educated. We have, the jobs were there, but the system then was not allowing really to unlock the potential of 50% of the population, which are women. So then, just when the vision was announced in 2015, there was only a contribution of 17% of women in the workplace. And the plan was that by the year 2030 to introduce 1 million jobs to reach a 33% of participation in the workforce by 2030. But guess what? Because if there's a will, there's a way. We have reached that target just last year. So now we have 33% of our women participating, and still 9 years ahead from the plan. Not only that, fixing the system was by, if we want to have our economy diversified, then we have to diversify the workplace and diversify the industries, and in creating opportunities for women in sectors that they were underrepresented. And that's why we're the Public Investment Fund, where I joined just this year after a banking career of 24 years before that. When I joined the fund, it was at the time of announcing its 5-year strategy, where it has to help in the development and deepening of 13 sectors. Some of them were not existed in Saudi Arabia, like tourism, like entertainment, where this will create more jobs for women. But the inclusiveness did not happen without the social and culture change. What really meant a lot of me, despite that I've been working and breaking barriers and crossing barriers, not only breaking records, is when I earlier joined the Public Investment Fund, it was not about the policy, because they have really great policies. For instance, the recruitment policy is not gender biased. It goes through the system, the CV, and it compares it with the skill without looking into the name or the gender of the employee. And that's why, the Public Investment Fund back in 2015 had 0 female. Now 28% of the employees are female. Not only that, 52, including myself, hold senior roles. 52 employees hold senior. And those 52 are being representing the sovereign wealth funds on the board wherever the fund operates. And this is where we're trying to include and introduce diversity to the board, even if the system or the law does not exist. So the Public Investment Fund, or PIF, as Chiara always pronounce it, is trying to push for that, using its power, using the huge capital, is to have women in boardroom. So that's why we reached that. But what meant a lot of me is not the policies, which are great, like maternity, like remote working, the recruitment. It's when I joined, all my colleagues and my peers, and even the governor, my boss, the common question that I received when I joined was, what do you need, Rania, to support you towards achieving your objective and thrive? And this really means a lot to me in, an all-boys club, to get accepted, and not only accepted, to get supported towards, thriving. This really helped, So this culture and this inclusive environment only happens if it comes from the top.
Absolutely. I can't think that Silicon Valley is as accommodating, and I'm sure I'm sure that you, all of you who have gone through that, can attest. So I wanted to turn now to Princess Kalia, who will give us her sort of mental health dimension to all of this, because you have a master's degree from Columbia, I must say. I'm very happy because I'm Columbia Law School too, so yes, in mental health issues. And so what has this pandemic meant? What have you seen? And if you can talk a little bit about that toxic culture in, in Silicon Valley.
Well, I'm just going to turn this a little bit because I feel like I've got my back to you guys. So I want to start by saying a quote by Buckminster Fuller. And first by thanking my host. Thank you for having me. It's been such a pleasure and a joy and an honor. Thank you, Chiara. Thank you, the Women's Forum. Thank you, everybody who's been great at making all this magic happen. But I wanted to start with a quote from Buckminster Fuller, which is that you never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. So for those of you that don't know, Buckminster Fuller was an architect, a systems designer, I think a genius, also a man, but nobody's perfect. And he has kind of been a model by which I have, modeled my own life in terms of the fact that I grew up wanting to solve problems. I've always been obsessed with math. I used to tutor calculus. I loved puzzles. I went into college as an undergraduate. This is 1994, which ages me, as one of 3 women in the computer science department, the class of 500. So for 2 years, there's 3 women in an entire hallway like this. So I'm used to being the odd woman out, and today I'm also the odd woman out in that I am not somebody that is very familiar with the world of finance in the sense that I'm just joining the venture capital world. But what I love to do is solve problems. And so I went from solving math equations to then deciding that the world of solving math equations for coding was not enough. There was a bigger world out there, and that was politics. So I decided I wanted to be a diplomat. I joined the State Department. I worked for 2 years as a Peace Corps volunteer in Bulgaria, thinking that was the way I was going to save the world. Unfortunately, while I was there, I got a multi-drug resistant lung infection. I was told I had very few years to live. I was in quarantine, and I discovered that actually any body politic can be taken down by an infectious disease if it's starting to cross borders and is voracious enough. This was in 1999. So I went back and went to Columbia for my public health degree, convinced that the only way that I could help and solve the problem that was about to hit the world was by studying infectious disease and national security, which is what I did. And I joined the Council on Foreign Relations, pushing the infectious disease agenda, which nobody listened to. This is more than 10 years ago. And then because nobody was listening, I went into HIV research, ended up working in an AIDS hospital in India, solving the problem of how do we stop that disease from crossing borders, because it was the only one people seemed to care about. Then joined the Aga Khan Development Network, was an auditing member of their board for 5 years, so working in 32 countries, mostly in the developing world, and I really saw so many systems. What was working? What wasn't working? How were they treating women? How was that impacting the health sector? How was that impacting the politics sector? How was that impacting their mental health? When I left that job, I had an unfortunate accident that happened to me, which I was the victim of an attack, and I suffered. My mental health suffered. And that's when I realized the paucity of treatments for people with mental health issues. And I became obsessed with raising the alarm on the fact that we didn't have proper mental health treatments and ones that worked, and that we had basically the tip of an iceberg coming our way. Now, this was more than 10 years ago when I think I started lecturing on mental health in 2011. And I would literally go and I'd do a talk and somebody else would say, I saw you talk and I want you to speak too, but can you talk about motivation? Because actually nobody cares about depression. And I said, no, if you want me to talk, I'm only going to talk about the thing that I think is important, which is depression, anxiety, and the coming specter of mental illness. Now, for better or for worse, what has fallen upon us now is the dual problems of both COVID, so infectious disease and national security, and then mental health, which has hit us like a ton of bricks. And in the interim between the mental health thing and this one, having been the victim of a violent attack myself, I decided to go into the world of cryptocurrency because I discovered a company called Guardian Circle that was a personal security network for people, where basically bystanders could become part of the solution when there was a security issue, and you could all basically collect cryptocurrency points for having helped someone. I became involved in that, and unfortunately, that's when I discovered the toxic masculinity that we have been dealing with, what we've been talking about for these past 2 days, where literally you do not have a seat at the table, when you are hit upon at every moment, where you are not allowed to speak, where you are objectified, and it is not possible to be a brain in the room, you are only a body. I had never experienced this, never. And to be honest, I dropped out. I just said, okay, I'll still support the company, but I'm out of this equation. But I don't know how many of you know this, but yesterday there was a rape on a train, and more than 24 people watched as a woman was raped for 8 minutes, and nobody did anything.
Where?
So in Philadelphia, on a train. So I feel like right now with the women equation, a lot of us are bystanders and we're trying to do what we can, but we have to do something. And I believe, and this is where I'm getting to what I'm doing now, which is then I joined Jetty because I realized by dropping out of crypto, I had become the bystander. I said, women are not being treated right, but rather than tackle that, I just don't want to go to the conferences. I'm not going to go. But now I've realized that you can't be a bystander when women are not being treated properly. In order to get the respect that we deserve, we need to have that seat at the table. And the only thing that I would say is that part of why I've decided to become a venture partner in Jetty, is because I believe the only way we will get a seat at that table is if we fund businesses built by women for women. When I joined the cryptocurrency world, it was the Wild West. What happens when boys make the toys? What happens when boys make the rules? What happens when there are no norms and there are no regulations and there's nobody protecting us? There's no governance. That is what happened. I had a friend who literally, she was one of the brightest lights in crypto. She committed suicide because of how badly she was treated. I don't want that to happen to anyone else. So I'm here to say we should invest in women. I'm here to say, that we want to keep this year, between August and September of this year, 800,000 women dropped out of the workforce. And that was not just because of childcare. That was because 1 in 5 women already were suffering from mental health issues, partly because 1 in 5 women are the victim of some sort of sexual affront or assault, but that on top of that, since COVID, that number has gone up 30%. So we are dealing with a huge population of women who are not only being disempowered at work, but are being disempowered in their lives and are suffering. And so part of the way that we can solve that equation is both investing in women and building this new existing paradigm together, and at the same time, solving the problems we already created. And JEDI has been in partnership with 3 different platforms for mental health, 1 in America, 1 in Europe, 1 in the Middle East, to try to at least address what's already happening. So before we build that new system, we can at least take care of the problems that we have already solved. So I hope you'll all join me in helping to promote female business, not just management positions, but really, how do we build the world better? How do we make sure it's not a Facebook making 1 in 3 girls have body dysmorphia? How do we build that system better? We have women build it, because they will build it better.
And how do we, so thank you very much, because this was an impassioned cry to change the system, right? Which you're doing already,
Exactly.
and you're gonna help us fund this change. But I wanted to turn to Gold on practical level. How are we gonna change the system? We have to have more women, obviously, as partners making those hires and making those decisions, and then maybe women investing in other women, as you're saying, so that we need the men. We need to make sure the men are, understanding how important these ventures are, because obviously women startups are usually very, the objective is more toward SDG-oriented issues. At least that's what I've been seeing. So environmental issues, poverty alleviation issues, education, pharma, all of these kind of things. So why can't, what should we do better concretely, Gold?
It's an interesting question. I, in the engineering background, had kind of assumed that this was a meritocracy, and I was used to doing things myself, and I've heard quite a few women in the last 2 days talk about male champions being needed, and I do think that's important, and I didn't 10 years ago. I did not understand that that was necessary, because in engineering, you don't have to do that. You can come into the room and you can make a concrete, articulate point, and you can be right and it be understood. VCs and people in finance tend to believe it's a meritocracy, but the truth is we now have concrete data that artificial intelligence can do a better job of evaluating deal flow and actually come out with equitable relationships in between, like the ratio of applicants versus the ratio of recommended for future due diligence or investment, than a male investment panel. Which means, gentlemen, you either get with this program or you will be out of a job when we realize what a meritocratic investment universe is supposed to look like. And since that is not true right now, male champions really are needed, because the universe of introductions, the universe of implicit trust before communication can occur, is a fact in investment that I did not appreciate coming from a more objective universe. And I think that's very important to realize. The extent to which that this is true is kind of horrifically magnified by my own experience in the last year. I started a company with about $1 million in angel investment, notably angel, not VC. I built that to a $39 million valuation in 6 months and still could not secure VC funding. Not with great advisors, not with appropriate introductions, and that is a big part of the reason why I also will be stepping back into VC over the coming months, because clearly this is a critical issue that you cannot solve by being good enough, not without the excellent point that has been made that we have to invest in these women-owned businesses. And I had actually previously been in venture capital and had left for very similar reasons. There is definitely something to be said for standing and fighting your ground, but also the industry has changed a lot from those of you who have did. So thank you from people like me who were not courageous enough to do that 10 years ago. I appreciate that. I will be coming back, and I hope others join us. And it's not just that we need to be in VC. We need to be LPs. Because what we face then every day on a VC basis, and what I saw, is also that you have to go to LPs. And some of the suggestions made by them are equally as virulent, if not worse, than what you would experience from the side of the table as an entrepreneur, which means that it's critically important that women be the ones who are actually writing the checks, not just the intermediaries, not just the decision makers, not just the managers. Those are critically important. But any of us that has disposable capital at any level is valuable. Every positive interaction that you have with someone on the mental health basis really helps to offset negative interactions. And if you want to keep women as your financial managers, then even if it's whatever capacity you have, having one positive interaction with a female founder, or an LP, as we call them in the States, a female funder, is incredibly, incredibly important.
Well, thank you very much, and I hope you're all listening to this message. I have to say the only thing that's gotten me through a rocky few political years, to say the least, was being on the board of a tech ag startup called Farm from a Box. They've been very present at the Women's Forum. We brought them to Milan Expo many years ago. And it's taken so much time and effort to raise money for this fund when a dog walking app got $5 million in, you know, what, a few weeks. And it just, there's something totally messed up about that, and we need to do something else. Another thing on that, on the toxic culture and Silicon Valley, I don't know how many of you use a Roomba, you know, those little vacuum things. Have you ever tried to program it to have a male voice? It doesn't exist because the cleaner-uppers are women. And it never occurred to the people in Silicon Valley that they may have, I called mine Jeeves, I want mine to have a male voice. And it just, I can't, you know, well, so that just shows you, it just shows you where we are.
Yeah. So Nina, it gets worse than that. So for example, women are 50% more likely to be injured in car crashes. 3 times more likely for it to be a moderate injury, 2 times more likely for it to be a severe injury. And do you know why? Take a big guess. Guess who designs cars? Yeah. Do you think that if a woman was building that car company, they would build a car that hurt her? This despite the fact that men drive faster and are more reckless. We are the ones getting hurt because they're not built for us. So it's not just the Roomba. It's not the embedded sexism of, you know, most Siri voices being female and your Roomba being female. It's actually the things that are built to hurt us, not realizing that they don't, including medicine, where most of the standard doses that you have are based on a male body and actually have really poor side effects for women, sometimes more harmful than the thing they were meant to cure. So there's a real sort of reckoning that needs to come in the world of men in terms of really making it a place that women want to be in. And I just had one small point, which is, does anybody know who Joanne Rowling is? So Joanne Rowling, otherwise known as J.K. Rowling, was refused by publisher after publisher after publisher after publisher. When she degenderized her name, she finally got published.
That's extraordinary.
That is horrible. And then recently there were 2 things that happened. One is, actually this one was 2017, but a guy by accident who was working for a movie review company was in a team project, and so the automatic filler that went at the bottom said the name of his female colleague. And all of a sudden, he went from being everybody's favorite reviewer to being like, listen, you don't understand what you're doing. You're doing this wrong, la la la. He said, and this happened for a week before he figured out what was going on. He said, literally, it was hell. Everything I asked or suggested was questions. Clients I could do in my sleep were condescending. One asked if I was single. Then he realized that the header, the footer on his email had changed. And he said, I don't know how you women do it. I would have quit. It was so bad. I started to question my own judgment. And then what most recently happened, and there was just an article about this, is that we have this new phenomenon going on, which is that men and women are transitioning in the workplace. So we've never had this sort of numbers of people that used to be men now experiencing what it's like to be women, or women now experiencing what it's like to be men, but now we do. And I can tell you, what they say is incredible. The women say, that transition to men say, wow, this is the best thing I've ever done. I've never had so much respect. I love it. And the men say, I now understand white male privilege, and I am so sorry. Everything from getting in fights with people at the airport because they say, no, this is my seat, and say, no, it's my seat. Whereas before they would have said, okay. They're like, no, ma'am, you're crazy. You don't understand. He's like, there's every single situation where they could be undermined, they are undermined. So I think we have a really interesting mental health situation right now where for the first time we can actually have anonymous reports of what it's like to be on which side of the coin and how much white male privilege does add to the equation of whether you have a mental health experience that is good, reinforcing, positive, and empowering, or so disempowering you want to drop out of the workplace.
Okay, thank you. Sort of depressing, but it's a wake-up call. I mean, it is a wake-up call. You said something very interesting, Rania, that's saying when the screening was based on just by computer,
this increased
it was
to
on
28%.
purely merit.
Purely merit.
Women just jumped to what percentage?
28%.
28% in what, a couple of years?
In 6 years.
In 6 years. So
Yeah.
how are we going to improve that? And, you know, how can we empower more Saudi women to get involved in this kind of venture funding? I know you're not, you know, Sovereign Wealth Fund isn't into that, but if I mean, the pleasure that investing in this startup for me, gave me, was worth anything I put in. And I'm just wondering whether that's the kind of thing that there's some serious wealth in Saudi Arabia, and thank the Lord, thanks to the laws of succession, women do have the money to invest. So do you think, stepping away from your role at the PIF, what do you think? Do you think that this is something that the Saudi women would be could get excited about?
Yes, actually, VC is relatively new in Saudi
Yes.
Arabia, and the good thing that we are learning from the mistakes of others. When it comes to investments, the core principle is diversity. So why we ask people to diversify their funds, and we're not applying that to a woman-led business versus men-led business or co-led business. So when it comes to investments, it's all about performance and return. And this morning we just heard Ms. Havonana when talking about how the GDP will increase with more inclusiveness. So it's all about performance. So the more inclusiveness, it's about performance. But what we need to have is basically, you know, accelerators, and women by nature, they are kind of risk adverse. So like what Princess Kalia just mentioned, that, you know, if you're not there, if you're not agreeing with some of the ethics, you will just, you know, step back. We need to help women to actually voice their opinion, to be more confident. When I remember that I was the only one in a boardroom, it was really difficult for me to be confident enough to sit on the top of that table and not at the back seat. And it's not about competence, it's about confidence. It's about, you know, accepting and giving ourselves that push. And therefore, I like always to do personally, you know, mentorship, sponsorship of young females being, you know, entrepreneurs, or they are at the workplace, because this is what they need, is the guidance. I remember in my previous job as a CEO of a bank, when I used to offer a promotion to a male or a female, if a male has, like, you know, 60% of the competencies of that job, he will just jump and take it. If it's a woman, first of all, am I eligible for that? What it takes me to make that job, how I can be successful, how is this? So we need to build that confidence and to help women to take more risks, because when they take more risks, they will have more startups, more VCs that are led by women, and they will perform well, so investors will come and invest with them.
Thank you. And Sophia, you've got in your sort of pitch book, you've got some what we call unicorns. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about some of these unicorns, the ones that have really broken through. Before you go, I just wanted to say there's something interesting I came across in the literature about pitches, just about Rania's point. Men tend to overpromise in pitches, while women tend to be more realistic. And I think, you know, that I can see that happening. I've never been present for that, but I can understand that would be something that would happen.
Usually, just to add to this, sorry, it's usually when women go and pitch for investments, or even, you know, they just go and show the upside, the downside, what are the risks. So they are really realistic. When it comes to men, they just, you know, promise all the profits, the returns, and then they manage the expectation later on. So that's why they get more investments.
It's very interesting.
Yes.
So, unicorns. Tell us about some unicorns.
Okay, I'm going to tell you a little bit about unicorns, but I'd love to tell you a secret first, if I may.
Sure, we love secrets.
So, historically, I have been very frightened of public speaking. Like many women, I've held myself back in the shadows because many women feel very uncomfortable about being at the center of attention, whereas, as you rightly say, men like to step forward. So I used to have a white-knuckle fear of public speaking, and the day that I met Khalia, I was invited on a panel to address the United Nations, and I was naturally very frightened. I think the sound has gone a bit weird. And I was given some testosterone. So I put a few drops of testosterone under my tongue about 15 minutes before I went on stage, and I walked in, and it was like talking to my mates around the fire. For the first time in my life, I was cool, calm, and collected. And so I have a belief that this confidence issue is partly about testosterone. And as we get older, us ladies, we develop more testosterone and we become more confident in our older age. So here I am now, calm as a cucumber.
There might be a pharma startup here.
Yeah, that's a secret.
Yeah. Now, unicorns.
So unicorns. So one of the reasons that we set up JEDI was to make a lot of money for a lot of people. This is not just about social justice. And if female-founded companies are backed, they tend to be more sustainable, more robust, they grow faster, and believe it or not, they actually exit faster. So when you go and speak to an LP or a traditional white privileged male, and I love white privileged males, I'm surrounded by them, so I love them. But if you speak to a very traditional investor, who's generally an older white guy from Eton or Harvard or Oxbridge or whatever, the feeling is the old guard believe that women can't build big companies. They believe that women have maybe nail polishing salons or hairdressing salons, or they make beautiful lingerie or pretty dresses, but they can't build billion-dollar companies. So in our deck, in our JEDI deck, very early on, we have this slide that lists all the unicorns that have been built by women, sometimes in partnership with men, sometimes not. And it really blows men's minds because they just didn't realize that there's so many unicorn billion-dollar companies that are coming out now that are founded by women. And one of those is, of course, Bumble. But there are many, they are legion. So I think the point is that you're dealing with conscious and unconscious bias, and those issues need to be addressed kindly and gently. And it's also an intergenerational thing, because I think if you speak to younger LPs who understand that they've maybe been brought up in a far more equitable world where perhaps their mothers have worked, there's a different expectation. We were talking yesterday about that, the transfer of wealth, weren't we? The next gen impact investors who are far more conscious and far more interested in not only ESG and saving the planet, after all it's the planet they're going to inherit, but also far more conscious of diversity issues and gender issues.
Absolutely. My students are absolutely much more conscious. We'll be talking about all of these issues on the last panel, so I hope you'll hang in there. Now, call to action, because we're here at the Women's Forum, and Chiara is sitting right out there saying, okay, well, what is the call to action? So we're going to do a quick sort of tour de table. While you're thinking of your call to action, which I know you already have prepared, I just want to remind you that Gelsomina Vigliotti, the VP of the European Investment Bank, also is working very much on sort of these objectives, and there's they are tracking and benchmarking all of the VC funding for women and women and men founders, and it is becoming a moral imperative. Not only it's an economic imperative, as well as a moral imperative. So it's good to know that there's some policy thinking behind here, as well as you know, these women trying to, you know, change things and create new ways of thinking and new molds. So call to action, I'll start with you.
Well, I commit to continuing to fund females and the projects that they want to achieve in the world, and actually to mentoring them, which I've done in the past as well, so that people that don't have the confidence to make their dream come true can. If you can build it, you can dream it. If you can dream it, you can build it. So really being there to help make that happen.
Great.
So we can have a, you know, ensure a she-covery for all.
Yes. Go.
Yes, a few quick things. The first is that this is all about data. So I have listed a few pledges that I think are very useful for this. I interviewed about 50 women before coming here because I wanted to be able to harness more voices than my own. And one of the things that I heard was we, as investors, should be differently accounting for what it is that it qualifies as investing in women. So as a percentage then, if you write a $10 million check to the company, how much was invested in a woman is not that there was a woman present, it's how much ownership did she have? And from that, we can get a much more specific idea about what this really looks like. And then each of you as an investor should set a percentage of what you feel is appropriate that on an annualized basis, you can hold your wealth managers accountable for investing in women for. So that's A. B, one of the best ways to overcome biases is with traction. So I have a corresponding pledge for those of you who have companies to commit to a certain percentage of your annual budget for vendors of products and services that should go to startups led by women or non-male founders, and that you should also try to make a decision about whether or not you're going to work with that vendor within a certain number of days. And I heartily recommend, if it can be managed, that you do under 30, because if a woman is short on capital, the period of sales cannot be 3 times longer than males, and that is another issue that is very concrete that can be dealt with. The last is to also channel Anna and the global investor. I had heard from this panel when we were in our prep session, and so many of you over the last 2 days, that we are done waiting. And I believe that. So I've set up an alternative e-commerce platform that any of you can use to list non-male-owned majority businesses. And when things are purchased through that platform, that we will pool the transaction fees into a common purse that we can draw from for VC funds that are associated with this Women's Forum G20 group. And I strongly believe that can push us in the right direction. And it also comes with a trademark logo. So every time someone picks up a package, we should make it as easy as possible to know whether or not buying that is going to support a woman and the economic transition to an equitable future. And for all of those things, thank you so much, Chiara, for inviting me. Thank you for everyone who's here. And I have set up a website, Women's Forum Action, and you can go there to find all of the calls to action. And if yours is not listed, please contact me. I would love to include it so that we are able to move these points forward over the coming year.
See, these VC ladies are getting really concrete. Okay, we're out of time, but we are obviously going to, Rania, please, what is your call to action or your commitment?
I will continue to contribute on fixing systems, be it in my country or worldwide, and work on more collaborating towards amplifying the synergy. So the actions from the Women Forum, from the G20 Empower, the club, the 30% club, I like to continue building on those foundations and to fix the system without losing an eye from continuing to be a role model to inspire and sponsor and mentorship the future generations, because I always like to simply shift from simply women empowered to having women in power.
Brava, fantastic. Last but not least, Sophie. Bravissima. Sophia?
So I commit to building JEDI as a fully inclusive, sustainable fund that's going to return disproportionately high financial returns to its investors.
Well, that's short and sweet. So I have to say, thank you, Chiara. It's always just a pleasure to be here. This is my first conference since COVID, and it's just such a pleasure to see people and be surrounded by this great positive energy. May I close this session by saying, sorry, Jedi, may the Force be with us all.
Thank you.
This was the most beautiful channel. Oh, really amazing. We'll do it.